name is Ed Whitney. I first got involved in this whole question of what they call the New World Order or globalization back in exactly 1990 when President Bush, the first of that name, was talking about the New World Order, and I had never heard of that before. And so we started checking into it, and I found out basically in a nutshell it was a plan by a global elite to literally take over the entire world. You know, they wanted everything. They wanted the money, they wanted the economy, they wanted the religion, they wanted the whole 9 yards. And all this, leaving the general public had nothing to do with it. You know? That's so they had things like the United Nations going to essentially make all the rules down the road, and that was what I considered to be not such a good idea. So I started getting into that, reading all kinds of stuff I could get my hands on, and little by little over the last 20 plus years, I've accumulated quite a large reference library, some 800 books on the subject, and maybe 400 recordings of various types like DVDs or CDs. And it amounts to a pretty large compilation of information on, and I'm just an individual. I wrote a book several years ago called The Controllers, The Secret Rulers of the World, and that was just sort of a chronological history of some of these behind-the-scenes players and what they were doing and the events and the organizations that were involved with all this kind of stuff. And later I wrote a book called 9/11, What Really Happened, because I found out there was an enormous amount of stuff being written by various researchers of all different stripes that totally demolished the official government's story about 9/11. And so I put together a little 60-page booklet saying what the summary of all of these researchers had come up with. And given that the official story was obviously totally false, knowing what we know from all these various technicians and scientists and physicists and so forth, so what really happened, never mind the baloney, what are the facts of the case? And so that has sold pretty well, and so we'll see where it goes. But I find from talking to people that more and more people are becoming extremely suspect of the official story about 9/11, and they've finally started to wake up to the fact that maybe the government and the news media is not telling us the truth, and there's a lot more to the story than you can find out by reading the New York Times or watching the evening news on television. It's just one of those fascinating things. Where this all goes down the road, heaven knows. Given that the bottom line is that the government itself has been proved to be directly implicated in all this. And not only that, but even, various foreign entities like the Israeli Mossad and so forth have been implicated, and it's becoming a pretty hot issue. A lot of people, needless to say, are upset about this, and they really are looking forward to have an honest investigation of this whole circumstance. And certainly the people that are guilty of this definitely should be published. I mean, after all, this is arguably the crime of the century. And with some 3,000 people being killed, that's not something one would like to just simply overlook. That's something that demands investigation, demands justice and truth. And unfortunately, we cannot count on our own government to come up with the true story. In fact, their whole thing, their 9/11 commission report, was just a bunch of hogwash. Regarding 9/11, I happened to be at an insurance agency meeting. I used to be in the insurance business as a career, and as that meeting was going on, one of the people in the office said that, hey, an airplane just flew into the World Trade Center building. And so they turned on the television set, and a few minutes later, lo and behold, a second airplane hit the other tower. And I said, wow, this is unusual. And I said, where the heck is our NORAD and our air defense system and all this thing? This is strange. And then, stranger yet, within an hour, the South Tower totally collapsed. Now here we had a fire-resistant steel frame building which according to the building code, it had to be able to resist a fire for a minimum of 3 hours to qualify as fire resistive. And furthermore, the building code required that it would have automatic sprinklers. And obviously the sprinklers weren't working, which indicates somebody must have turned them off. Why would they do that? So when the building collapsed, I said, I've never heard of this. I never heard of a fire-resistive steel frame building collapse. And of course, that was my background in insurance, loss prevention, safety, building construction, all that kind of stuff. And I found out later that it's true. Nowhere in the history of the world, neither in America or anywhere else, had a steel frame building ever been brought down by fire. They only come down for two reasons. One, demolitions, deliberately taking them down, or earthquake, that there's been some destroyed by earthquake. But fire by itself, no, never would do it. Then I stopped to think even further, well, what happened to our entire air defense system? Here this activity was going on for something like an hour and a half. We normally have planes intercepted within 10 minutes if they go off course. So what happened? The whole system wasn't working. And who controls the system? Well, not Al-Qaeda, certainly. It's part of our own Department of Defense. So, I mean, there's so many oddball things that were going on there. And then, little by little, stuff started coming out in these various books and videotapes and so forth that indicated that the whole thing was, in fact, explosive demolitions that brought the building down, not fires. And yet, the media would not, publish any information to that effect. So that in itself was strange. How come the media, who you would think would be, giving us the facts right off the top, was keeping all this secret? And then, of course, that eventually turned out to be because the same, forces behind the scenes that control the government also control the news media and the banking industry, etc. So you've got this large amorphous group of individuals who have a very decidedly different agenda. Starting with Building 7, as you know, that was not hit by an airliner at all. And they did have some minor fires that were going. So finally, about 5:20 in the afternoon, the building collapsed. And the people that have investigated that have concluded that the only possible thing that would make that building collapse was to have demolition, explosive demolitions in the building. And I'm personally convinced that that's what brought all three of the towers down. But of course, the newspapers don't want to admit that. So I mean, they don't even talk about the existence of explosions, even though we're literally hundreds of eyewitnesses to that effect. Why are they keeping it from us? Well, it's because they're all part of the big scam. As far as Henry Kissinger, of course, he was one of the primary globalists for many years. He's one of these members, it's a member of the, what I call the Big Three. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, member of the Bilderberg Group, and a member of the Trilateral Commission, and these are all organizations which are pushing us toward a New World Order as fast as they can. And since he had been so active in that movement, President Bush nominated him to chair the commission, but then he quickly backed out because of what he called conflict of interest type of thing. He supposedly had clients that would be adversely affected by his testimony. So they brought in a couple of other insiders to do the investigation. And of course, the guy that was in charge of the committee to do the thing was himself a friend of the Bushes and an insider in his own right. And his whole function was that, look, this is the official story, and the only thing we're going to be looking at is facts that support the official story, but don't tell us anything about what really happened. We don't want to hear it. So all the witnesses were totally excluded if they had any adverse information, and were only heard if they could have some kind of thing to support the official story. Then we had organizations like NIST, that part of the Department of Commerce, that's a government agency that has come up with their versions of things, which turned out to be totally baloney from a technical engineering point of view. And you put the whole thing together, and the 9/11 report had just a one-sided thing. They had decided at the outset exactly what the conclusions were going to be, and that's all that went into the report. Anything to the contrary was arbitrarily discarded. PNAC, Project for a New American Century, is an American think tank. It was staffed primarily by what they call neocons or neoconservatives, who basically support the internationalist globalist view. And they put out a report saying that there's a lot has to be done to beef up our national defense. We've got to spend more money, of course, right? So the government's going to borrow more, naturally, not less. And in that report, they mentioned that there probably wouldn't be too much support for their additional spending unless there were something like a new Pearl Harbor, to occur. And a catastrophic event that would will get a lot of attention. And sure enough, along comes 9/11 with close to 3,000 deaths. That got a lot of attention. So they naturally made the most hay they could out of that, including all of this restrictive legislation that has come out in the meantime. And together with, so far, 2 major wars, and embarking for yet another one in Iran, which may occur at any time. So that's the way it goes. The whole idea is to keep the people in a state of fear. Always, if we don't have an enemy, we'll make one. And so this whole thing was what they call a false flag operation. You get one group that has an objective in mind. They create a major problem such as this. They blame it on somebody else, and since they control the news media as well as the government, they can perpetuate that scam for quite a long time. Just after in fact, while the event was still going on, Vice President Cheney was in the White House Emergency Control Center down in the basement, and Norman Mineta, who was the chairman, or actually the secretary of transportation, was also there, and he testified as to when Cheney arrived and so forth. But the essence of it was that the conclusion of many experts was that Cheney is one of the key people involved in the whole thing in the first place. Even President Bush was apparently sort of peripherally involved. He, as you recall, at the time of the attack, was down in Florida giving a talk to the youngsters at a grade school down there, reading exercise. And Andrew Card, his chief of staff, had told him that one of the towers had been attacked. And he sort of looked and said, "Yeah, okay." And then he goes back to his thing with the kids. Then Card comes back again with a report of a second tower being struck, and he just sort of sits there, Bush does, with a blank expression on his face. And you would have think, under the circumstances, the Secret Service would rush him out of there in 2 seconds flat, but he sits around for another 20 minutes or so. Finally, he leaves, and you say, "My goodness, man, what's going on in our country these days?" The day before the 9/11 step, the Pentagon, Dov Zakheim, who was the controller, admitted that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion of expenses over the years. Now that's a heck of a lot of money, and and the fact that the 9/11 event occurred the next day kind of put that particular tidbit of news on the back burner and prevented that from becoming a major scandal. Almost became forgotten about in terms of the relative importance of things. But that, left a strange taste in my mouth. But then beyond that, the Pentagon, as you know, is one of the most highly defended buildings in the country. They have self-defense, weapons right there on the roof that would normally shoot down an airplane. And anything that got anywhere near it would automatically be shot down without a question. But it wasn't. Why? Did they? Was it actually a government plane that hit the building, or a missile, or what? We just don't know. Then again, the part of the building was hit happened to be the place where most of the government records were stolen. The whole accounting thing, that would expose this $2.3 trillion question. That was exactly what was hit. Furthermore, that was at the part of the building which was as far away from the Secretary of Defense's office as it could be. If a true hijacker was really interested in doing damage, they would have hit just the opposite side of the building where the Secretary of Defense and the top brass and all the military were. But oh no, it was in this area that would just had been remodeled and was essentially mostly vacant except for a few government records here and there. And it was destroyed, it looks like, by a missile, or unless possibly by internal explosives, but certainly not an airliner. It just wasn't there. So many oddball unanswered questions, and of course the government's not talking, they're just keeping their mouth shut, naturally. Well, Larry Silverstein is very prominent in the Israeli community. He was very active in the fundraising part of it, and did a lot of good things in the charitable sense like that. But he's also a good friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister now of Israel, and he had a lot of high-ranking friends, and he negotiated a deal to lease the entire complex except for Building 7, which he already owned, for 99 years. We got a very favorable lease, and it was amongst his Jewish friends that he made that deal in the first place. So all this about 6 weeks before the event took place, he had just taken it over and arranged insurance on it, increased the limit to, what was it, something like $3.55 billion of insurance coverage, including anything because of terrorism, special arrangement worked out with the AIG insurance and so forth. And naturally, as to say, the building came down, and he made an immense personal profit on it. In fact, he even argued that he had not one but two events, being there were two airplanes that hit the towers. That was not one claim, but two, two separate claims. He wanted his limits doubled, and they finally worked out a compromise that he was paid about $4.5 billion. But be that as it may, it was a really strange event, and being that he admitted being involved in it, he shouldn't have gotten anything whatsoever as far as the Building 7 was concerned. But even beyond that, the whole complex was kind of marginal from a financial point of view. They had a lot of asbestos in there that needed to be removed, and it cost a lot of money to do that. There were a lot of vacant spaces in the building, so between having minimal rental income and the prospect of having to spend many millions of dollars on asbestos abatement, the whole building was not very much of a profitable thing, So, you could see that there was incentive just in that alone for the buildings to have been deliberately destroyed. And yet he got paid anyway. So, it was lucky for me that I was not an expert witness in the case of the testimony. That would not have helped this case at all. Well, going back to these globalists, these controllers that I wrote about in my original book, you have this behind-the-scenes power elite that really runs almost everything already. They control most of the major governments of the world, certainly the United States and Great Britain and Israel at least, and others as well. They control the news media. They control the movies. They control the banking industry. They control the major international corporations that have no particular loyalty to any specific nation. Now, we might have, companies like, say, General Electric, for example, based right here in Fairfield, and clearly is an American company, but they have businesses literally all over the world, and so their loyalty is not necessarily to the United States particularly, but to this globalist elite, you see. And there's several thousand of this, what I call the jet setter elite that's flying around the world all their time in their corporate jets and their Gulfstreams and all. And they are far more interested in their own financial well-being than they are in you and me, I assure you. So it just goes on and on. But the whole thing, they need to have a continuing tension amongst the people. They have to have people afraid, people made to believe that there is some terrible threats out there that needs to be dealt with, and we need to have a powerful military force scattered all over the world in 170 countries or whatever they are, and we have to keep them there to protect our interests. And if it wasn't for them, the whole thing would collapse and the government would go down the tubes and we wouldn't have America anymore. You get all this constant buildup of baloney, and unfortunately a lot of people believe it, but fortunately a lot of people are coming to realize that it is a bunch of baloney and they don't believe it anymore. So, we're making headway, and sooner or later, peacefully I hope, we'll be able to get some of this stuff resolved. Hope it's not going to come down to a civil war, as some pessimists say. Where the total economy collapses and people are out in the street with no food and the government can't pay them food stamps anymore because the government doesn't have any money and blah, blah, blah. I mean, all these things are certainly possible scenarios, but I don't see them coming. At least I certainly hope they don't. But I do see, on the other hand, a gradual buildup of people starting to realize what the reality of the situation is, in spite of the fact that they're being fed bad information by the main news media. They're starting finally to make sense of all this stuff, I think. One person can make a difference. Take Mahatma Gandhi, for example. I mean, here was a very pacifist gentleman. He took on the entire British Empire and persuaded them eventually to get out of India and let India be self-ruling. He had Mother Teresa. There was a very saintly woman that was helping the poor and happened to be in India as well. But that one individual obviously had a massive impact on the benefits of the world, And so it is. There are literally thousands, tens of thousands of people just in America alone that have, gotten on this, you might call it a modern crusade to, make the country straighten out and fly right again. And this, the vast majority of American citizens are disgusted when they find out what is going on in the world, particularly when they find out that their own government has sometimes been involved in it. That is very disturbing to them, and a lot of people find it absolutely impossible to accept the truth that their own government would do these things. And they're patriotic, they love their country, they believe in the flag, and they say, what? Our own government involved in taking down our own buildings in New York? Cannot be. That just can't be. Well, unfortunately, it can be, and it is. And more people are starting to realize that.
As an individual, we don't have a First Amendment. There is no freedom of the press. And we have a Fourth Amendment. That's the right to be left alone, fundamentally.
The people do have power. We are not in a hopeless situation. Simply by standing up and refusing to be ignorant, by letting them know we're not fooled, that false flag operations won't work on us anymore, that we're not duped.